All right, we're going to be talking about wholeness today. And my goal for you all is that not only are you learning about wholeness, but at the end of this lecture you'll say, I want something different. That's what I would like to hear from you all. I'm going to start out with a story. I call it The Real Surprise. On June 5, 1863, Ellen White was worshiping with a small group in Michigan when she received a 45-minute vision. Now imagine yourself visiting with friends and all of a sudden you just zone out for 45 minutes. When asked to explain it, she could only say that they would not be able to understand it all at once. Now once we understand what she saw, we'll be able to understand what she means. We won't understand it. It came during a time when smoking was used for lung infections, if you can imagine that. So smoking was actually recommended for lung infections. Mercury and arsenic were considered cleansing tonics, and sunlight by day and fresh air at night were thought to cause disease. So imagine yourself in a time where all these things are present. Sunlight is bad, night air is bad, cigarette or smoke is good. Okay. The vision spoke against things that they were for. The vision spoke against the use of alcoholic drinks, spices, rich desserts. Tobacco was denounced as a poison. Tea and coffee. That was like a traditional staple. Tea and coffee is having effects similar to those of tobacco, but to a lesser degree. Eating too much, even of good food, and snacking between meals or just before going to bed were shown to be distinctly unhealthful. Very solemnly indicated that animal food or meat as a chief cause of the decline of the human race. Now, of all the things that were shown to her, that was probably the most challenging, because meat was thought to be the staple of the diet. Swine's flesh was denounced in particular. So here not only was meat kind of pointed out, but pork in particular. So now she was not only talking about meat, this vision was separating the meats. Overwork was presented as a great evil, and she was instructed to sound an alarm against the use of drugs. Arsenic, strychnine, calomel. Now at that time, if you think of drugs, that was our drugs of today, antibiotics and things like that. So this vision was saying, these things that you've been for, you should now perceive yourself to be against. Now, is it any wonder, and I'll go back to that she said to them, we're not able to understand this all at once. See, that line is now easy to understand, because how can you take in all of this at once when your tradition, your culture, everything is built around doing those very things? The vision spoke for the things that in some ways that they had been against. Keep the dwelling free from filth inside and out. As you all know, the skirts were long, and the later recommendation was to actually shorten the skirts. This was thought to be completely taboo and immoral. So the idea that there were germs, these bug-like things that would get on the skirts and somehow expose people was completely foreign to what they understood. Let the sunshine and fresh air in rather than keeping it out. Enjoy plenty of fresh fruits, vegetables, grains, and nuts. Get plenty of exercise, especially out of doors. They had never heard of jogging. I remember in my lifetime where jogging was just coming into a real, to be an important thing. So we can't even imagine a day when people weren't looking at that as being the important duty. Cultivate a mental attitude of gratitude, trust in God, and optimism. This, she said, is one of health's greatest safeguards. Nurture habits of regularity. I want you to really look at that phrase, because I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on that, especially in my next lecture. Nurture habits of regularity. Good sleep habits, self-control for mental as well as physical health, because irregular hours for eating and sleeping sap the brain forces. So how do you change what you were once for and be against it? And how do you change what you were against to now be for it? This is more complex than we sometimes think. One, because there's a change in perception. I make a lot of my own creams and things. I call it creams and things. I've got all kinds of folders on my computer called creams and things. One of the interesting things about certain kind of creams is that they feel good on at the moment, but they actually dry your lips over time. A lot of chapsticks have petroleum or mineral oil in them, and that is actually not, we'll leave the whole caustic problem, but they are actually drying. So what that does when you use the chapstick, you're actually encouraged to use more and more and more to keep your lips moist, when really the very chapstick that you're using is causing your lips to be dry. Well, when I tell people that, they're like, well, that can't be true. I mean, that's what chapstick is for. So this change in perception that what you're doing is actually causing the very thing that you're trying to undo, it requires a whole change in perception. It requires a change in behavior. If you're used to eating late at nights and the suggestion is not to eat late at nights, that's hard. Why? Because you have a whole routine about that. I remember for myself that I stopped watching TV about, let's see, how long has it been now? About 9 years ago. And it happened when I was doing my PhD at Emory. And I decided that if ever there was a time to break that habit, it was there. So I'd never had a TV any larger than a little tiny box because I was trying so hard not to love it. I thought, well, this will be easy. I only watch TV just a very little bit. I'll just put it out and that'll be easy. Do you know how long it took me to get used to that? Anybody want to guess?
A year?
Yes, between 1 and 2 years. Why? Because, excuse me, at the time, as a single person, that was my routine. I would get my supper, even though my family had never watched TV while we were eating supper or anything like that. I had gotten into the habit of taking my supper, sitting down in front of the TV and just watching a little bit. It was part of my tradition of eating. And to suddenly stop that was very difficult. I remember the first time I got my plate of food and I sat down on my little couch and I thought, oh, what do I do? This is odd, this is awkward. So even though I wasn't watching it much, it was difficult to let go. Even though I let it go immediately, but I yearned for that TV. Did I yearn for the specific programs that were on? No, I yearned for that tradition of keeping me company in the times when I needed company. Now it's been, as I said, almost 9 years since I've had a TV. I still don't have a TV. I enjoy watching film, but in my mind, film is different because you can choose. You have to choose what you're going to see, and you have to measure it and evaluate it. I went over a friend's house recently, and she wanted to watch a very good program on TV. There was nothing wrong with the program. Then all of a sudden, a commercial came on. And then 10 minutes later, another commercial came on. And then another commercial, and then another commercial. I was so unused to commercials that by the end of that hour program, I thought I was going to go nutty. And I said to my friend, I said, I actually measured the amount of commercials in that 1 hour program, and it was approximately 1/3 of the time. 1/3 of the time, almost 1/3 of the time. And I said, do you realize that in this hour we've seen almost 20 minutes of commercials? And do you know what she said? Can you guess? Anybody?
Really?
Yeah, exactly. Really? She said, I hadn't noticed. Because she had learned in her head to tune out when the commercials came. But I was so unused to tuning them out. I was like, you know, trying to filter these commercials. And I said, I am so thankful I'm no longer watching TV because these are just an intrusion into your life. Well, I told that story to some people and they said, well, yeah, but now we have TVs that can actually, you can tape and then you can fast forward through the commercials. I like that even less because it gives you the feeling that whatever you don't want in life, you just fast forward it. You know, I remember a friend who told me she was watching a video, not a video, there was something she was watching and she thought, well, I'll just fast forward it. But she couldn't because it wasn't set up in that way. And she said it was very frustrating that she couldn't fast forward something. All right, so it's a change in behavior. It's a change in culture because very often the whole culture is around doing a certain thing. Go back to eating late or not eating breakfast or a variety of things. We have a culture that is built around doing things a certain way. And when you want to change and you go against culture, it's very difficult. In the Adventist culture, that makes it a little bit easier because you have a whole group of people that are doing it with you. And so it doesn't feel awkward. I had something funny happen though when I was speaking at a retreat once, and the women bringing out the food, brought out all this food, and then all of a sudden they brought out the dessert. And I said, what is it like cooking for an Adventist group? And she said, well, I just noticed that on Sabbath, she said, that is what you call it, right? Yes. She said, on Sabbath, you all eat a lot of desserts. So we need to look at our culture. You know, she says, and I've noticed that you don't eat much meat. She said, in fact, you've asked for no meat. She said, but there's a lot of dessert that seems to be disappearing. So there's a change in how you spend your money. If you go from eating one thing to eating another, it's just a change in how you shop. Complete change. It's also a change in your relationships because will your loved one make the same changes you're making? You decide to go vegetarian and they want to eat meat. You don't want to cook meat. How does that function in a house? Or they decide they want to go vegan. They don't want any meat, milk, no eggs, no cheese. And you do. How do you manage that in relationships? And then finally, it is a change in how you spend your time. If you're used to cuddling up with your loved one in front of the TV and all of a sudden they don't want to watch TV, where do you do that? Or you have someone that wants to get out and run all the time or exercise all the time and you're not an exerciser, what happens if you're not a part of that in some way? Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 questions. What are we discussing? How does it all fit together? And what difference does it make? The final question is the most important one. What are we discussing? We have all different kind of acronyms for it. If you go to Weimar, you'll find the acronym New Start that puts the 8 natural remedies in the acronym of NEWSTART. If you'll notice, those are mostly individual items: nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, air, rest. Oh, that last one, sorry, I should say trust and divine power. And so it's very much built around the individual, but I've loved this acronym, and I also enjoy the next one. You find this at Florida Hospital, Creation Health, built around the word creation: choice, rest, environment, activity, trust, interpersonal relationships, outlook, and nutrition. Very similar to the first one if you compare them. Though there's a few differences, but this one has added environment and also added choice. I think those are 2 good additions. And then here at Loma Linda we have wholeness, will and desire, which is similar to creation's choice, healthy relationships, outlook, love of God, exercise, nutrition, environment. The next one is the one that's different from the previous 2, and that's service and community. And as you'll see in our definition of wholeness, we believe that it's not about the individual. It's about how you are in relation to community and the rest of the world. And that's the one thing a little bit different about ours. But they're all good. They're all suggesting that there are certain items that come together and affect you as a person. So let's look at our definition. Wholeness involves every aspect of one's existence integrated through a loving relationship with God and expressed, and there are 4 things: integrating mind, body, spirit, strengthening relationships, serving the community, and caring for resources. So there are actually several aspects to this. First of all, we're suggesting that it involves everything about you. Everything. Not only your life in this life, but also your life in what we believe is the world to come. That wholeness is all of that. 2, that is integrated through a loving relationship with God, or what some people might say is higher power. Now, I want to focus on the term integrated. We're suggesting that these aspects of you do not cohere unless there is something called the law of love. And that is best understood through a loving relationship with God. Because try as we might, and I'm not picking on any of your relationships, but try as you might, the love you experience is flawed. The love you experience from mothers, fathers, your spouses, your children, in the end, it will fail in some way. And that's the heartache that we experience by living in this life, isn't it? That love is not perfect. And there is a love that is perfect, and it's that love that integrates us as people. I've heard this story so many times, and I'm sure you've heard it too, where couples marry the perfect love of their life, and then they look on that pillow at some point, some evening, and say, "What have I done?" Or, "Who is this person?" Because people change through time. The person you marry at 20 is not the person you have at 30, 40, 50, and 60. And you just hope that you grow together over that time. And then you see the term expressed by. We're suggesting that if your life is integrated by that law of love, by the kind of love that is found in a divine being, then it will be expressed by. You won't have to go out and create these things. It will be expressed by the integration of mind, body, spirit, strengthened relationships, serving the community, and caring for resources. Now this is and I'm going to walk over here and show you how this works. Here we have God in the middle. It's a little bit hard to see on this PowerPoint, but in the lower half of this is all sort of blue. And the blue is coming up and affecting the rest of this. So what we are suggesting is that this law of love, God, this divine power, this law of love is infiltrating all of this and is causing us to express these four different things. Integrated mind, body, spirit, having relationships, good, healthy relationships with significant others, caring about the community, and attending to our resources or the environment. And that the net result is meaning and spirituality and connection. That this love infuses all of that, strengthens it, and in the end that you have meaning and connection. You'll also notice that these boundaries are not solid, that they're dashed. What we're suggesting there is that everything is fluid and infiltrates the other, and that you can't experience a problem in one area without experiencing a problem in the other area. So people will say, well, I can have a good life even if I don't believe in God. How I would revise that would be, it's hard to have a good life if you don't understand the law of love. You know, you might call that something else, but it's really hard to have a meaningful life if you don't really understand the law of love and service and giving to another. Okay, now I'd like to compare this with the traditional view. This is a more traditional view where you have the different aspects of the self, which in the view we're talking about you also have. But here this is suggesting that it's mostly individual. You don't see anything except, I think there is one here, interpersonal well-being. But it's all about how the person is. And the traditional view of wholeness or spirituality very often is all about the person. And we're suggesting that it isn't all about the person. That how I relate to my family or how I relate to the community in which my house is, that is as important as any optimism I might have in my own mind. Sometimes in the traditional view they suggest that there are compartments. This one you can see there's some bleeding over, and we're suggesting that those are completely integrated, that you cannot separate mind, body, spirit. And then that takes us to the third one. There is no soul separation. So the traditional view might say, well, we've got this body here in this life, and when the body fails, the soul goes somewhere else. We're suggesting that wholeness is so profoundly, it means that it's so profoundly integrated that you can't separate those. That they're so profoundly integrated that you can't separate them, that the soul always needs a body. In fact, the soul and the body are one. And that the soul is about how we think and the decisions we make and the choices we make. And that your body, and this is a very profound thing, that your body is forever tied to the stories you tell and to how you think. Forever, eternally tied. And that's what the resurrection of Jesus tells us. Now, if that's true, and we're suggesting that it is, that means that how you treat your body and how you are in the world right now has eternal consequences. Not just for whether you're saved or lost, but how you are eternally. Because those are forever bound together. So then we're looking at how they compare, and we're suggesting that this is a better understanding of wholeness. That it is bigger than the individual, that there aren't compartments, that they are forever integrated, forever tied together, eternally even. The other thing that we're also suggesting is that if the law of love is rightly understood, then heaven begins, as Ellen White suggests, now. Heaven begins now. It is a ceaseless approaching to Christ through the love of God. So it's suggesting that heaven is that journey of understanding the law of love. Now that's a huge difference between heaven is about keeping certain, throwing out the TV for instance. You know? Now, to the degree that making a change affects the law, our understanding of the law of love, then that's true. But it's not about those things. It's a ceaseless approaching to God through Christ Jesus. So understanding the law of love. Okay. There are many, many texts we could analyze, and I get excited every time I start talking about texts, but we're going to really look closely at one text. You've been talking about exegesis and exegetical ways, and we're going to look at this one text and analyzing it. First, we're going to understand two Greek terms, and I've actually added a third one. So we'll look at 3 Greek terms, and then we'll put them together. But we're going to do something interesting right now. After we talk about these 3 Greek terms, I'm going to ask you to tell me that if we just look at those Greek terms, what is the story? Okay? And then we'll apply it to the text. All right. Katharizo. Often used in relation to leprosy, and it means to cleanse. So if you see up there the top definition, to make clean, I've put that at the top because that's the one that's used the most. It's only used a total of 31 times in the New Testament anyway, but most of those times are used to mean something is drained away. It's washed away. A plate has been put under the water as it's running and all the stuff is washed off. What does katharizo sound like to you?
Cathartic.
Yes, cathartic. What else? Is any, well, you all are healthcare. What's that? Yes, that's it. That's right, Carol, catheter. Now, if you think a catheter does exactly what this word means. It drains away. It's the avenue through which something just gets washed away or drains away. Okay, now, it does have some moral connotations, but that's not how it's used the most. It's mostly used for a sore, if we look at my sore, in a month, that will be gone, katharizo. It'll simply have gone away. All right. Now this is a word that is used some in relation to healing, not as much as the other two we'll talk about. Ia omihi, or omehi. It means to heal or make whole, and it can be used two different ways, figuratively or literally. So when you use this word, it could mean that it actually happened or that it figuratively happened. Okay? Now let's move to the one that's used a lot. Sozo. S-O-Z-O, sozo. This is used approximately 90 times in the New Testament to mean saved or salvation. You see it here at the bottom. You see it here where it says it's used save 36 times, saved 50 times. You add all of those together, and 90, 91 times or so it's used to mean saved or salvation. Now, when you look at these terms, they're built, do you see how they're growing in meaning? Katharizo was simply to drain away, be gone. The next one meant it could be either way. It could be that it was gone or that disease is gone. It could be a larger figurative meaning. But sozo means salvation, to be saved, to be entirely made well. It's huge. It's the difference, and pardon me for this illustration, but it's the best one I have. I think we all know the difference between a kiss and a kiss. Do you know what I mean? What is the difference? What is the difference between a kiss and a kiss? That's right. Meaning, potential. The second kiss is so much larger. And when a person experiences that, they start asking all kinds of questions. Might this be love or marriage or a deep relationship? Or might it mean that this connection will never end? Or might this mean that this love can overcome all the things that all the sins that I commit? It's a much bigger meaning. And that's sozo. It's a much bigger meaning. Okay, so before I give you the answer, when you look at those three words, what story would they tell to you if you were going to go from, we looked at three, from the katharizo to the ia om ehi, or to sozo? What story would that tell you if we went from katharizo to sozo? Jesus?
Jesus, the sacrifice he made for us.
If you didn't know about Jesus, what would just the words tell you?
Basic transformation.
Okay, some sort of transformation. From what to what?
From illness to wholeness.
From illness to wholeness. A deep kind of wholeness. Right, okay. Let's look at the text. You know this text well. Hopefully it will have some new light today. Now this is Luke 17, 11 through 19. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance. They called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priest." Now, how many times have they heard that before?
At least once.
And probably many, right? Because where you go to be declared either healthy or not healthy is the priest, right? In a sense, so it's like, is this where you need to go, or go show yourselves to the priest? All right. So they have probably heard that before. But this time it's different. As they went, they were cleansed. The Greek word there is used there is katharizo. Now, I'm going to walk it out right here. Let's say this point is where they have contact with Jesus. All right? They're going over there. We'll say this is where the priests are. Okay? They are halfway there. Now, let's think about where there is. Let's put it in a kind of a context of today. Let's say over there is winning the lottery, which is not as big as what they want, right? So it's not really a good example. But let's put winning the lottery here. All right. As they were going, they notice, we're going to use it in today's story, that they have a bucket full of money. That might represent the fact that they have won the lottery. Now, if you were on your way to winning the lottery and you came here in this middle point and noticed that you had a pile of money and perhaps the whole amount, would you do anything other than what you've been told to do? In other words, they're told, go there. Go to the priest. Go show yourselves to the priest. Here they are, looking at their skin and saying, oh, we're cleansed. The leprosy is gone. Now, the most important thing for them to do is go to the priest, right? Because if they don't complete that, they don't get declared whole, no matter what their skin looks like. You see what I'm saying? So just seeing all the money does not suggest you shouldn't go get the rest. Okay, so they see that their skin is clean, and it would be absurd for them not to continue that journey, because then they get declared whole, healed. All right, so this next part does not make sense, really. One of them, when he saw he was healed, do you see what happens there? What happens? But what happens in the words? There's a different Greek word there. When he saw he was healed. Okay, now that's a word that can be used either literally or figuratively, right? All right. When he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. I love Luke. I was not raised as a Christian, and I love Luke because Luke focuses on the outsiders. And if you've ever been an outsider in any way, you can appreciate this. So Luke is saying, look, people, look who came back. It's that guy you consider to be the outsider, the one that's unclean. That's the guy that came back. Jesus asked, were not all cleansed, katharizo? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you what? Sozo. Okay. So here we have a man that saw that his skin was cleansed, and something was bigger than going to the priest to have them declare him healed. What was it? This is your quiz for the day. What was it? What did he see that the others did not see?
I would assume that he felt a deeper healing than just a physical healing.
All right. Now, I don't know if that's why the author used a different word or not. But could it be that he realized in that moment that the priest was not there? The priest was here. And that when Jesus said, go show yourself to the priest, the one who could declare, the only ones who could declare that you are whole, that instantly he knew that that priest was not there. That priest was back here. I think that's the only thing that could have made him turn around. So I disagree with the many, literally hundreds of sermons that have been given on this topic, because they all talk about him going back because of he was so thankful. That's a smaller issue. The bigger issue is he had to go to the priest. He had to be declared whole. You see, it's a different kind of declaration than he would have received from the priests over there. Okay.
So you're saying that if he had continued on the journey, he would have received a declaration that you're physically well, you no longer have leprosy. But coming back, it was more than physical. It was physical, spiritual, and otherwise.
Yes, am I saying that if he had proceeded on, he would have only been declared well physically.
Right.
But by coming back,
yes,
he was declared well in a whole way. Yes and no, and I'll tell you the no part of it. I would like to suggest that when Jesus said, your faith has made you whole, that happened at this point, that awareness took place, that when he recognized that Jesus was able to give something larger, that was the point, and he simply went back to receive it. Because there's some people, that may never get back to the church or may never get back to some location, but having acknowledged that that's what it is has made the difference. So I suppose it all depends on where in this journey you feel like he grasped, at whatever point he grasped the law of love. That's the point that he was made whole. And whether it happened right in the middle of that journey or precisely when he went back to Jesus, but we know that Jesus said your faith has made, it is already happened, has made you whole. And so he gave the declaration that those priests could not have given. So it's a very big thing. Because he's the ultimate priest. That's right.
Yes.
That's right. The priest.
The high priest.
Yes. And what's interesting is he gives up being declared healthy by the earthly priest to be declared healthy by the ultimate priest. That's a huge risk to give that up for this. But of course, the payoff was huge. Yeah.
So would you think he showed himself to the priest twice?
I don't know. The text does not. The text does not tell us.
But again, that was a ritual that had to be done.
Yes.
Right, that was the ritual in place for someone who was,
That's the ritual that must be done. It doesn't suggest that he did it before he went back to see Jesus. That's the thing the text does not suggest.
So he went against the ritual.
It seems as though he went against the ritual at least immediately.
Yeah. That says a lot.
Yes, it does. Yes.
It had me thinking, I never saw it in that light.
Yes. It
That's
says a lot.
powerful.
Yeah. Now the text goes on, when he was demanded of the Pharisees, this is Jesus, this is the text right after, verse 20, when the kingdom of God should come, he answered them and said, the kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, lo here, lo there. For behold, the kingdom of God is within you. It's translated in the New American Standard Version, you'll see in the second point there, is in your midst. So the text is telling us, suggesting what we already talked about before, that heaven perhaps begins now. That when you are touched with that kind of love, that is heaven. That's what heaven is. And that the only difference between the heaven that's eternal and this life is that everything about that location will be love. It won't be in little bits and pieces. We won't have to search for it in these shadowy ways. It will be the only thing that exists. But that it is to be found here to the degree that we are touched by God and touched by that law of love. Okay, so what does the text tell us? That there are degrees of healing. There is in fact katharizo, and 9 of the lepers were happy for that. That's all they wanted. And they went on. And here's what's interesting, is that the Lord allowed them to do that. He didn't step in and say, hey, you, what are you doing? That's what they wanted, and that's what they got. So when you think of the people that you care for in the hospital and other places, there are people that simply want that kind of healing. But the question is this: in your presence, will they see the option for more? That's the difference. They may not want more, but will they know that the option for more exists? Does it so infiltrate your being that by being with you, they are able to come to that awareness, there is something more, and I want it. Lead me to it. See, that has to do with the space around you. There are people out there, and I dare say chaplains, some of whom just want to put a Band-Aid on the current concern so they can move on to the next person. So the question is, in your presence, does a person have the space to be themselves, the space to lay their concerns, just the space and the place to lay their deepest angst and their greatest vulnerabilities, and know that there is a love that covers that? There is a love that can change them and that can love them in spite of all that. And not even in spite of, but even because of. Think of that. Not just in spite of, but because you need to be loved. That's why love is there. So not everyone can see that larger picture or can feel that larger need, Gus, as you said before. That one leper saw that larger picture. That person was at a place where they could detect that larger need in themselves. And the next one, desire is followed by action. There are 2 actions in this text by that leper. One is the action right here in the middle, because he stopped. Something made him stop. That's a huge action. It's like the action I took to say, wait a minute, I'm watching too much TV. That is an action right there. Then there is the going back to Jesus. That is another action. But here's the interesting point that we'll talk a lot more about later. When you make this action, the action of stopping, the action of being aware, the action of seeing something you have never seen before, it is much easier for this second action to follow. And then I'll say something that's a little bit more profound. The second action is actually not even possible without the first. If you're not aware, you can't turn back. If you don't see the deeper need, you can't make a different choice. And we'll talk about how that's all tied up with memory later. Okay, and finally, Jesus responded to the desire plus action. That desire plus the stopping. That desire plus the turning back. All right, what else does the text tell us? There is something greater than being pronounced clean by the priest, and that is being pronounced whole by the priest of all time. That a person will risk her entire future to connect with that greater thing, his or her entire future. The leper risked that entire future to get that greater thing. Third, that the result is a deeper healing that is worth every price, and that the kingdom of God is in some ways now. Okay, so what is the spiritual law that is so life-changing? The one we broke at the beginning of time, the one that changes our lives when it's restored. What is that law? Okay, now, we're going to go through, there's a lot of words here, and I don't like slides that have a lot of words on them, but just bear with me as we go through it. We're going to look in the book Steps to Christ that are talking about the steps to Christ. We sometimes don't realize what those words mean. The very first sentence of that book says, nature and revelation alike testify of God's love. Now I want to read the first sentence of the Patriarchs and Prophets, which is the beginning of the conflict series, and then the last sentence of the Great Controversy, which is the end of the conflict series, and you've heard these many times. The first sentence in Patriarchs and Prophets says, God is love. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Ellen White, this is a person that has talked a lot about health and how it relates to spirituality. And this concept of God is love begins that story. Then in the next one, the last sentence in the Great Controversy, some of you know well. The Great Controversy is ended, and I'll skip part of it. Yes, you know it, sin and sinners are no more. From the minutest atom to the greatest world, all things animate and inanimate in their unshadowed beauty and perfect joy declare that God is love. So the beginning and ending of this story is that God is love. Now, as if that weren't enough, the law of God is an expression of His very nature. It is an embodiment of the great principle of love, and hence is the foundation of His government in heaven and earth. Our hearts are renewed in the likeness of God. If the divine love is implanted in the soul, will not the law of God be carried out in the life? When the principle of love is implanted in the heart, when man, and I'll say and women, is renewed after the image of Him that created him, the new covenant promise is fulfilled. We wonder what that new covenant is. The new covenant is that the law of love is written in our hearts. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their midst will I write them. If the law is written in the heart, will it not shape the life? The law given upon Sinai was the enunciation of the principle of love, of revelation to earth, of the law of heaven. Okay, now I love this one. At the cross, love and selfishness stood face to face. Now I love that personification. You can just imagine love and selfishness staring at each other in the face. And there's that huge question right there of which one will win out. Of course, a great evil force has suggested that selfishness will win out, because at the beginning of time, that's what we chose, and after all, if we had it to choose all over again, isn't that the choice we will always make? And so the great evil is saying, selfishness is all these people know how to do. So when they're standing there, face out, by every implication is that selfishness will win, and the cross tells us that it didn't, that the law of love was triumphant there. Okay, and Alden Thompson asked the question what it would be like to feel that law of love so full, to be so full of meaning that the law of love will be secure through all eternity, that was something huge that happened at the cross. Okay, now, I have 5 minutes to 5 or 10 to finish this. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. We'll talk about this more later. I'm going to tie this in with some psychological theories so we'll understand why that law of love is so profoundly important. And at this point, I'm going to cover these and write on the board. Now, you all have heard of John Bowlby, probably. John Bowlby suggested that loss and attachment are connected, and that you will experience grief to the degree that you have had a healthy attachment or any kind of attachment. If you have a poor attachment, you'll really struggle with grief. If you have a good attachment, you'll do better with grief. This is why people who have lost spouses, it doesn't, it doesn't make logical sense. But you would think if you were really in a healthy way attached to your spouse, that you would grieve longer. That isn't the case. Bowlby suggests that if you have a really good, healthy attachment, you actually grieve in a better way. And you're able to move on in a better way and attach again to another person. So these two are very closely connected. Okay. B-O-W-L-B-Y. That's right. B-O-W-L-B-Y. All right. Now, the question then we would all ask in relation to that is, how can I have a healthy attachment, right? Because they're so closely connected that having a healthy attachment, we are learning, is significant to the individual and actually predicts a lot of things about the way we function in our lives. Again, I'm going to tell more about that later. But the thing I want to mention now, this is a baby. I know it doesn't look like a baby, but it is. All right, and this is a mother. Okay. To have a healthy attachment, Bowlby suggests that two things have to take place. It's not just about whether you're loved. We used to think that. If you're loved, you're going to do fine. But it's the kind of love. It has this love or attachment has two parts to it. Part one, well, I'm not a very good artist, am I? Who said no? We'll put a flower on her dress. All right. All right. What a good, healthy attachment means that a primary caregiver can totally understand you while also holding on to their own world. I maybe could draw that out here. Can totally understand a baby while also holding on to their own world. Now, I'm going to go over this quickly because we're going to talk about it more later. Because what happens with this baby? Inside, they internalize both processes. If anyone in their life can do it with them, they internalize both of those processes, meaning, I am okay and I am not everything there is. It's those two things. So if someone tells me that I look bad, I can say, well, your comment may be valid and it may not. You see what I'm saying? Because what you're saying is important, but it's not all there is. What I think is important, but it's not all there is. And you're able to integrate the two within your head. Now, what does that do in terms of love? That gives you an incredible stability and security. Because if you're all there is, that's scary. Even if you don't believe in God. You need to know that there's something, a baby especially, we have determined that babies can't live without love, without another person. They can't exist if they think they're all there is. And then the other side is true too. If you think that is all there is, then you're nothing. And what you want and your desires mean nothing. You can't exist like that either. And you can't exist if you have only one of those. So if you have both of those, that who you are is of eternal importance. Even the horrible things you do matter to somebody. And that there is something else beyond you. If you have those two things, then you are a secure, what's called, you have secure attachment, and you tend to be stable. Is that how you spell stable? As you all know, when you're teaching and you write something on the board, all of a sudden it looks incorrect. Then you are secure and stable as a person. That kind of love changes you. It changes not just how you feel, it changes how you think. This is a whole change in thinking process. And like I say, we'll talk more about that later. Okay. Now the next one I'm going to talk about is Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson suggests that there are stages that we go through in development. And does anyone remember this first foundational stage? Anybody? I'll start it and you can finish it. Trust versus, good, right. Trust versus mistrust. All right. Now there are several that go on up. And then at the top we have our generativity versus shame and doubt. Okay. What Erikson is suggesting is that if you start on this side of things, we can imagine a line through here. If you start on this side, you will have the tendency to go on this side here, and on up. And you'll tend to be generative as a person in old age. If you start on this side, you'll tend to stay on this side as you go up through the developmental stages. Now this is what's interesting. In your 20s to 30s, there is a stage, intimacy versus isolation. This is where people often first realize that they haven't done this well because they are finding it hard to partner with people. What Erikson is suggesting is that you can't just all of a sudden jump over to here if you've been on this side all along. That you actually need to go back and learn to do this. You see what I'm saying? Because trust is that foundation of a life. And now we're back to the idea of attachment, that there is a certain kind of love that forms the foundation of a life, that forms the foundation for the best kind of a life. And this is the development of being able to trust others well. And if I add an attachment idea, without losing yourself. Now, what does this have to do with spirituality? Erik Erikson suggests that there is a value that's developed at each one of these stages. The one that's developed here is hope. He suggests that hope is the basis of all religion. Because if you learn to trust, you have then developed the hope in something outside yourself that can redeem you, that can give you meaning when your life lacks meaning, that can help you go forward even when you feel like you can't take another step. That is what is developed if you learn to trust. So even if a person does not call that divine power God, we're still back to that law of love. You see what I'm saying? It's at the basis of life. There is this thing called attachment, this bonding, the thing that says, I have to be personally valuable to someone, and I have to understand that there is something outside myself. And I must understand that I've got to trust another and be trustworthy in order to progress well through the stages. And if I can do all that, then I will have hope. So that's how important this law of love is, no matter what you call it, even if you don't call it God. All right, now I'm going to end on two stories that I encountered in the clinical setting. The first is the mother of a 2-year-old. She came into our ER, and her story was this, that she had woken up in the middle of the night and her daughter was, not in the middle of the night, sorry. She had woken up in the morning and went to see her daughter in her bed, and her daughter was comatose. She brought her 2-year-old into our ER, and that's the backstory. But now here's the second part of the story. This mother was extremely angry at everybody, belligerent at everybody who walked in her room, cursed a blue streak, if you know what I mean. and was very difficult to be around. And I got involved because at the time I was teaching people spiritual care. I was working kind of as a chaplain for nursing staff or for hospital staff. And they said, Carla, could you go in and see this woman? I thought, oh yeah, that's right. You know, send your beloved employee to the den of lions. So yes, you've experienced it. So I went in her room, and I was young and inexperienced. I did not know what I was doing, but I did something by accident that worked, and I'll tell you what I did. She did to me exactly what she had done to everybody else. You know, why isn't anybody doing anything? And my daughter, look at her, she can't. I don't know if she just would. I mean, I sound like I don't make sense, and that's exactly how she sounded. And I just thought, now I understand why they have labeled her as a difficult patient. Sad to say, our patients get labeled in ways that aren't appropriate, and that label gets passed on. So I looked at her and I thought, okay, you know, I understand why she's been labeled as difficult. She's cursing at me, and I'm here trying to help her. And then she said something, and to this day I can't remember exactly what, except that I noticed it. She said, if I had just, well, it doesn't matter. And then she went on, and I said, what you just said, and then it dawned on me that there was something she thought that she had done. I said, do you think you've done something? Now I'm asking her because I'm just naive, right? She burst into tears, and she said, it's my fault. It's my fault. She came and woke me up in the middle of the night and told me, she asked me, she said, Mama, can I sleep with you tonight? She said, honey, she said, I'm trying to help you learn to sleep by yourself. And she said, I sent her to bed. I woke up in the morning and she was comatose. She said, if I had let her sleep with me, she said, I would have, you know, caught this, because her daughter had a seizure disorder. And she said, this wouldn't have happened. It's my fault. Now do we understand this woman? The thing that's bothering her is, of course, it's her daughter, but it's guilt. Larger than her, almost larger than what's going on in the hospital right there is this mother's guilt that is just a burden on her. And it is such a burden that we have almost come to the place where we have to discharge her because she's so difficult. The second one, another woman with an ectopic pregnancy. As you probably know, an ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy that takes place in the fallopian tubes and is not even viable. You can't have a birth or the development of a fetus in the fallopian tubes. It's too small and it can't grow there. So this young woman was admitted to the hospital. She did not even know she was pregnant, mind you. She did not know she was pregnant. The doctor tells her that she has an ectopic pregnancy. Suddenly she gets hysterical. My baby, my baby, my baby. And we don't understand why she's so hysterical. She didn't know she was pregnant. She didn't necessarily want more children. This is a non-viable pregnancy, and why is she hysterical? The anesthesiologist made a grave error, but I can't really blame him. He didn't understand at the time how one part of a person connects to all the other parts. When he anesthetized her for her surgery, he said, it's only an ectopic. He was trying to comfort her. That's what she went to sleep hearing, and that's what she woke up. Now she's having dreams and nightmares about a male voice saying to her, it's only an ectopic, as she sees these horrible pictures in her dreams. Okay, so what's happening? What we find out is that this woman's younger brother, actually now I can't remember whether it was her younger brother or her old brother, had committed suicide when he was 18, left a note that he was gay, and the father had instructed the family never to mention his name again, to treat that young man as if he had never existed. So this young woman, when she was younger, had not only experienced the death of a brother, her only brother, but she had experienced the complete erasure of him from life. So she couldn't cope with grief. She couldn't cope with loss. Now, when we're taking care of her, we have no idea that this ectopic pregnancy is related to the suicide of a brother many years ago. This is a point we're trying to make in wholeness, is that every aspect of us is related to every other aspect and is related to the community and the environment. And that wholeness isn't some other time in some other place. It can begin now. It's a journey. It's a way of being. It's a beginning to understand the law of love and how connected we are to the various aspects of ourselves and the various other people in our lives, and even to the environment. It can transform our being, the community, our attitude, and our connection with all resources. Thank you.